it's from I'll be reading The Temples That Jerusalem Forgot. And one of the things that excites me more than anything, and I think really what made our day so good today, is that when you get to go somewhere and you get to validate your belief system, you get to see. And like I said, nothing against our brother Judah, but face it, our brother Judah went in captivity for a long, long time. And the more you're here in Israel, the more you realize we live up in Galilee. And if you talk to rabbis up in Galilee, you know what they're going to tell you? They're going to tell you that the Messiah returns to Sfat. And they're going to tell you that he was born in Bethlehem up here in Galilee, because when they came back in the 12th and 13th and 14th century, that's where they lived. They lived in Galilee. They didn't live down here. So they brought replacements for everything that was down here. And unfortunately, since our brother Judah was out of this land for at least 1,000, 1,500 years before they even started coming back, never mind being a nation, their calendar was just assimilated from the nations. It's evident the crescent keeping came when they were in Babylon and some of the other things that came from there. But to meet people that never left, that never left the land, that have 3,600 years that were consecutively here, it gives credence. It doesn't mean everything they believe is true, because I believe the people we met today were not Samaritans. I believe that they were the Sadducees. And pretty soon I'm going to write a real good paper on it, because they believe exactly like the Sadducees. The Sadducees only believed in the first 5 books of the Bible. The Sadducees believed in starting the month by conjunction. The Sadducees always said to wait for the vernal equinox before the start of the year. They do everything the Sadducees did. And the Sadducees were priests, Levites. The Samaritans were not Levites, So what I believe happened is, in the 2nd century, when Rabbi Akiva started modern Judaism, and he basically puts the Sadducees out of business, they took over the temple, they took over the tithe, and you never hear from them ever again from the 2nd century AD. And I believe they probably assimilated with groups of Samaritans. There were Samaritans who were actually Jews, and they had synagogues up here in the north of the country, and they probably assimilated, and through the years, face it, if they were attacked and killed by everybody, there had to be some influence. Some influence from the Christians, some influence from the Jews, some influence from the Arabs. So they're going to keep a core of their beliefs with influence around it. But still fascinating people. And like I said, DNA test they did. The man is a Levite. And they do have their records to go back. And it was really interesting. And I said this the other day. One of the sad things that I see living here is that 4 million people a year come to Israel, the same as we do, looking for a spiritual experience, and they're being told a bunch of lies. And one of the biggest things, a matter of fact, probably if you talk to a tour guide, an archaeologist, a historian, or anything, because like today we went to where John the Baptist was, and they have 9 places here where John the Baptist lost his head. Can you imagine losing your head 9 times? But what they'll say is the one thing that everybody agrees on is the Temple Mount. And that's the one thing that I will prove to you conclusively over the next couple of days, that the one thing we can conclusively prove is the Temple Mount is not the Hiram El Sharif, where the Dome of the Rock is. Without a shadow of a doubt, it's impossible for that to be the Temple Mount. So we're going to start going over the evidence today. I have a PowerPoint from David Seelef. David Seelef, the book that started this. This is not my theory. Ernest Martin did a major amount of research in the 90s about this. Fantastic book. I mean, this book is almost 500 pages. I've probably read it at least a dozen times. And what I like about it is, when you have a theory that basically nobody else has, usually what you do is you take one tiny little quote or scripture, and then you have to build a lot of conjecture around it, and then they build a name for themselves. He doesn't do that. He has 500 pages of hard facts, all proving that where the Temple Mount really is. So I love the book. It's a great book. You can get it. I never met Dr. Martin. I was part of Worldwide Church of God that he was also part of. Dr. Martin did the work with the DIG with the Ambassador College students from 1969 to 1974 on the whole Southern Complex, where we're going to be on Wednesday. Gigantic place down there. A lot of things that we're going to see. But after Dr. Martin died, a man by the name of David Seelef took over for him. He took over. It's called ASK, A-S-K. Ashkelon is their organization that they work. And they found out that I was over here in Israel. They contacted me. We started working together somewhat on this and some other things, archaeological things. And I got to know David Seelef pretty well. So he gave me this PowerPoint. He said, I'm welcome to use it, which I'm going to use it today. He might even be here before the end of the year. If he is, he possibly may speak to our students at the school, which would really be good, because he's a really smart man. So I'm going to go over the PowerPoint today. On Wednesday, when we're in the area, we'll be showing different things about it. And then I'm going to show the brand new movie that they just made last year on this subject. We'll show it on Wednesday evening. So that, like I said, normally just in one lecture, 1 hour, I've never had anybody who didn't accept the facts once they were proven. Here you're going to get it more wide range. We're taping so that we can start putting more of this online, that people can really understand. Because it really is important. It's not just a matter of having a wrong geographical location of something in the Bible. As we're going to see when we get to the end of this, that there's a very, very important reason that we need to know this. So, I want to start by going in Psalm 48, because the first thing I want to conclusively show is that Mount Zion is the city of David. There's no doubt about it. Usually what I'll do is, with people that have no idea of the subject, sometimes there's groups that come in from all over the world, and people know that I have somewhat expertise on this, and they'll ask me to speak to them. I'll usually take them to the Mount of Olives, and the first thing I ask is, where is the Temple Mount? And they'll point over to the Dome of the Rock, and then, I'll say, well, where is the city of David? And I'll read over here, and they'll think it's the Dome of the Rock, because the Mount Zion and the city of David are the same spot. So once I show them where the city of David is, and then all of a sudden they're really confused. And then we can get started in the lecture. You already know a little bit of it, so I won't confuse you. Psalm 48 says, a psalm for the sons of Korah. Great is Yahweh and exceedingly to be praised in the city of our Elohim, his holy mountain. Beautiful and high, the joy of all the earth is Mount Zion. In the sides of the north, the city of the great king. Yahweh is known in her stronghold for a refuge. We have heard, so we have seen in the city of Elohim of hosts, in the city of our Elohim. Yahweh establishes it forever. Walk around Zion, yea, go all around it. Count its towers. Set your heart on its ramparts. Pass between its stronghold in order that you may report to the coming generation. So clearly we see Mount Zion and the Temple Mount are the same place. They're not two different places. And then 2 Chronicles 5:2. 2 Chronicles 5:2 clearly says, then Solomon gathered the elders of Israel and all the heads of the tribes, the rulers of the fathers of the sons of Israel to Jerusalem to bring up the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh from the city of David. It is Mount Zion. What is it that we wouldn't understand about that? Mount Zion is the Temple Mount, and the Temple Mount, Mount Zion, is the city of David. Now, why, if it's so simple, don't the people get it? And basically, it comes down to tradition. The same reason why, like I say, if you go through your Bible from Genesis to Revelation, it is impossible, if you're only reading your Bible, to come up with the Sabbath being on Sunday. It's nowhere there. You never get it. There's more than 150 references. And like I said, if someone was born on a desert island somewhere and only had a Bible, they would never come up with that. And yet, because of tradition and religion, people come up with these things. It's the same thing. Professor Mazar, who was the one who was working with Dr. Martin on the Southern Wall Complex, during the 70s they became good friends, and Dr. Martin said before Benjamin Mazar died that he was agreeing that the Temple Mount had to be in the city of David. And when Dr. Martin talked with Eilat Mazar, Professor Mazar's granddaughter, who is now doing all these things in the city of David, that he said she literally cried to him and said, you're not going to take my Temple Mount, you're not going to take my Temple Mount. So again, this is something that is emotional. This is something that these people, when you look at it, this is why the Arabs and the Jews are fighting. So just in the sense of that, of this 3,000-year conflict that's going on, right, could be solved very easily, because they both want the same piece of material. But yet the Arabs have no bearing on the city of David. The city of David is completely controlled by the Jews. If they believe that that was where the Temple Mount is, they can start building their temple tomorrow. But I'm going to show you prophetically, I don't think it's going to happen that way. I think that's where me and David Seelef might feel a little different. He feels that possibly this information will come out, and then that will solve the peace deal here, and the Jews will start building in the city of David. I'll show you a scripture where I believe it's the opposite.
Pretty good.
But Mount Zion is the city of David. There's no doubt about that. Also, let me see if I can, you know what, maybe I'll stay off my notes and we'll go a little bit into this and then I'll jump back and forth as we go along here. It says background to the temple, Adam, Eden, sin in the flood. We went over some of these things before. I'm not going to go over every slide. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Israel. Israel in the tabernacle in the wilderness. Israel in the promised land. King David desires to build a temple. His son Solomon does build the temple. Okay, we'll skip past. These are the digs that Dr. Martin worked on and the Southern Wall Complex. That's where we'll be. We'll be there on Wednesday. They've done a lot of work there. It's really amazing place over there. You can see that it's not at ground level. They're digging lower and lower to come to it. Some of these stones are 70 tons. 70 tons. One stone. Again, this is what's called Robinson's Arch, an arch that came out from the staircase going up there. More from the Southern Wall Complex. Mount of Olives directly across where you see them circling. And that's just Dr. Martin, the book that I showed you. Okay. Here we start going over the true Temple Mount, where the Temple Mount is. You can see the old city there. You can see what they're calling the Temple Mount. And I also have a picture that maybe I'll send around, because one of the things I'll show you is, it talks about in Josephus that from the house of the high priest, the house of Caiaphas, which we will be at on Wednesday, that you could always see inside the temple court. And from this picture, you'll clearly see from the house of Caiaphas, you can see the city of David. It's impossible to see where the Dome of the Rock is. Another thing which we'll see in here is that Josephus clearly said that the Temple Mount was on a crescent-shaped ridge. You can see from this picture that where the harem is not crescent-shaped at all, but where the city of David is clearly crescent-shaped. Now let me go ahead here to the next slide. Here's what they're calling the Temple Mount, the Dome of the Rock. We could maybe pass this around. Alaska Mosque, the Wailing Wall, Church of the Sepulchre, the Muslim Quarter, the Christian Quarter, the Armenian Quarter, and the Jewish Quarter. There's 4 quarters in the Old City. You can see the Arabs, and the Christian Quarter is all Arab Christians. So the Christians control about 3/4 of the Old City, where the Jews control less than 25%. And the Ophel Mount, and the city of David. Now, one thing that's interesting that we see from all the records, you could read it in the book of Maccabees, you could read it from Josephus, every single person clearly says that the temple was on the Ophel, and that the Acra was the city of David. So what you had basically is, you had 2 hills. You had a hill that was the Acra, where David built his citadel, and you had a hill north of there that was called the Ophel. And we're going to be in the Ophel. That's what it's actually called, Ophel Park, that we're going into. So everybody knows where the Ophel is, yet look where they put the temple. And to show you that there is no consistency with where the temple was, there are 8 different places that people believe the temple could have been up there. So if they're not in agreement, not everybody, one thing is it could be where the Dome of the Rock is. One is it could be where the church of the, not the church, but the cupola, it's like a little dome that's a little bit north of the Dome of the Rock. Cupola of Spirits, I think they call it, or something. Some say near the Alaska Mosque. Some say north of the Alaska Mosque. So nobody really knows. And one of the reasons is they have never found any archaeological evidence to the temple being up there. None. And that's why the Arabs actually say there was no temple. They say that it's all a mistake, it was built up. But it could just be that they're looking in the wrong place. Gabi Barkai, who's one of the top archaeologists here in Israel, he's lectured at our school many times. As a matter of fact, I think some of the ones that may be in here, anybody who was at the school in 206? Kim, that did the dig. Did you do the dig? The sifting? Dolly did.
Yeah.
Oh, our boys did.
Who's back there? Anna and Andy. Yeah. We did actually sifting. What they did was they were digging underneath the harem, and they were taking all this dirt because they built the world's largest mosque underneath there. And they actually thought the whole thing was going to collapse. But they took all that dirt, they dumped it into Kidron Valley, and even now, 6, 7 years later, they're still sifting through that dirt. And our students went there, they sifted one day. And amazingly enough, you know what they found there? They didn't find anything related to the temple. They did find one signet ring by somebody that they think possibly could have been connected to Jeremiah. No, nothing for sure. But if that was the temple, you'd think they'd find something. They found a lot of Arab stuff, and they found a lot of Christian stuff. And we're going to see why in a little bit. Because this is not the Temple Mount, but it was Fort Antonia. I want to show you a picture I have here of a basic Roman fort. Because, you know, just like in America, and we have some people here that are military people, and you know that if you're in a base, say in Germany, or you're in a base that's in Italy, that base is considered American property. So you just don't build it the way you want. You don't go there and say, oh, we're going to build this pretty base and put this thing on it. You build it according to standard because there's a standard because it's owned. It's the same way here. The Romans owned Fort Antonia. It was not owned by the Jews. It was considered Roman property. So they would make it standard. Now this is a standard fort. You could pass this around. And interesting enough, it's exactly, almost, 95% the same dimensions as the harem. The harem is a slight bit different because of the rock formation that's on the harem. Now, logically think to yourself, I also have a picture of the Dome of the Rock. I'm going to pass it around. This rock is not a little rock. When you ask Jewish people, they'll say the Dome of the Rock is where the world was created and all these other things. You don't read that anywhere. They also say that this is where the Holy of Holies was, and the Ark of the Covenant was on this rock. There's only one problem. The rock is 58 feet by 51 feet, and the whole Holy of Holies was only 30 by 30. Plus, it's not a flat rock. You know, it's an oblong rock. And we know the Temple Mount was built on what? A threshing floor. And you never build a threshing floor in anything except it's flat. Now what you'll also find on this rock, and this is modern now, just taken recently, is that there's crosses on it. Why would there be crosses on the Dome of the Rock? Because although you don't find in the Bible anything with the Temple Mount ever connected to a rock, you don't find it in the Mishnah, the Talmud, you don't find it in any Jewish writing, and logically think to yourself, if that gigantic rock was part of the temple, don't you think somebody would have mentioned it somewhere? And yet the silence on it is deafening. There's nothing ever mentioned. But who does mention about a rock? Josephus. He says Fort Antonio, which is also called the Rock, because of the large protruding rock that it comes from, and Herod put flagstones around the rock and made the platform from it. And this rock is 75 feet high. And you're going to see in the movie on Wednesday, you could actually see where the base of that rock is. There's an area that you can go into Jerusalem. You can see the bottom of the rock. So it's a massive rock. And they say Fort Antonio is called the Rock because of that. The other thing is, Fort Antonio, we know from Scripture, is also called the Praetorium. The Praetorium, or Gabata, you know, in the Aramaic, means outcropping rock. It's like a cupola, like a knoll, an outcropping rock. And we know that Yeshua came before Pilate where? In the Praetorium. Now what happened is, by the 2nd century AD, they found what looked like footprints in this rock. And they said, wow, those are Yeshua's footprints when he stood before the governor. And even all the pilgrims, the Bordeaux pilgrim in the 3rd century, and the other pilgrim in the 5th century, they all say this. So what they did was, they built churches around that rock. They built the Church of St. Cyril, and then they built the Church of the Holy Wisdom in the 5th century. Now when the Persians came in the 7th century, in the Arabs, they destroyed it. And what did they do? They built the Dome of the Rock. No other mosque in the world looks anything like that because it wasn't a mosque. And it's octagonal, 8-sided. Now, where we were today, we didn't get a chance to go up on the top, on the Tel. If we did, you would have found a 5th century church that looked exactly like the Dome of the Rock. When we go to Capernaum, the ones that are on the tour, the other ones that aren't coming, most of them have been to Capernaum, you'll see where Peter's mother-in-law's house is. They have a tiny little house, and then in the 3rd century, they built another structure around it that's octagonal. Because of the resurrection and whatnot, that's what they were doing in the Byzantine era. So clearly, this is not a mosque. It wasn't a synagogue, we know that, but it was a church. And that's why they were amazed when Gottlieb Barkai was digging and sifting that he found all relics of Christianity, but they didn't find nothing to a temple. So if it's the exact size of Fort Antonia, and if it's Fort Antonia is called a rock, and the only thing that's associated with a rock, wow, why on earth? Where are they missing it? Where is it coming from? You know, it's illogical to think anything else from it. It's the same size as Fort Antonia. It's the same place as Fort Antonia. It all fits. Here it is, you can see again, which would have been Fort Antonia. There's the Ophel, there's the Acra. And again, the book of Maccabees talks about the Acra abutted against the temple. You know, the Acra and the Ophel came together. There was, you can see a little slit in the middle, which was called Milo. Milo means fill in. And Solomon filled in the Milo because Jerusalem is a city built unto itself. We talked about this the other day. And he made it one platform. Now the Acra was a little higher so that the king, when he's in his palace, he can look down into the Temple Mount and he can see what's going. The same as the priest looking from Caiaphas' house, which you'll see tomorrow, can look down. So again, when we're there, I'll go over much of this to explain it. Same thing. Again, there's the city of David. Josephus says that the Temple Mount was built on a crescent-shaped ridge. A crescent-shaped ridge. And again, right near the Gihon, which is also a major part of this. Here's a top view of it. If you look at that picture I'm sending around, almost 95% the same dimensions as the Roman fort. Now this is showing where the different theories on possibly where the temple could have been. This is Martin's illustration. Is that coming from me? Oh, okay. I didn't know. Like I said, it's not my PowerPoint. I wasn't sure if music's coming out. Pretty cool. So you could see where Fort Antonia would have been. You could see the court in the middle, and then you could see the Temple Mount from there. The other thing is, Josephus makes the comment that he says Fort Antonia was so big, he said that it was actually like a city. He said, no, several cities. He said because from the north, you could not even see the temple because of Fort Antonia. So logically think to yourself, Fort Antonia is a Roman fort. There's somewhere around 10,000 soldiers in Fort Antonia. Remember, Romans and Jews, they don't mix, like oil and vinegar. Just like today, the Palestinians and the Jews, they don't mix. It was the same thing back then. So if you had 10,000 soldiers, what does that tell you? It means you probably have at least 20,000 personnel, right? You have to have people that cook, people that do haircuts. You're not just going to have the soldiers somewhere. You need people to care for those soldiers. So when you look at all the pictures that you've ever seen of the gigantic Temple Mount in this tiny little tower that's supposed to be Fort Antonia, how could it be? How can you fit 20,000 people in a tower? You know, I remember when I was a kid, how many people can you fit in a phone booth, right? I don't know how many you can fit in the tower, but it's certainly in 20,000. So, and the only reason for that is they have nowhere to put Fort Antonia. There's a place over there that where Fort Antonia was, where they actually found underground the holding cell of Fort Antonia. And they have the holding cell where Yeshua would have been when he was there. Him and the two robbers that were with him. So they know where Fort Antonia was, they have the evidence of it, and then they just deny it. They deny the evidence as we go along. Okay, here you can see again, you can see where the Fort Antonia was. The other thing that Josephus said was that there were two colonnades, 600 feet long, right here, that went from Fort Antonia to the temple. Two colonnades, 600 feet long. So when we're there, and the question always comes up, Don, where do you think the temple was? I don't have to think. I know exactly where it was. When we see that southern wall, all you would have to do is count 600 feet, and you would know where the northern wall of the temple is. It's that simple. So you can see it from there. Go into some historical sources that talk about this now. Water on the true Temple Mount. Extremely important. Remember that they're doing probably hundreds of thousands of sacrifices every year. They're doing more than 20,000 sacrifices just at Sukkot. And in order to do sacrifices, you got to have water. There's no doubt about it. A matter of fact, there's certain sacrifices you can't do without living water. Just like the mikvah had to be living water. You just couldn't jump in a bathtub and say, I'm going to mikvah. It had to be living water. The red heifer had to be living water. The ceremonial baths, had to be living water. The only living water source in all of Jerusalem is the Gihon Spring. That's simple. There's nothing else. There's nothing else for actually 5 miles until you hit Bethlehem. So right there would show you something. Because when you look in the Bible, from the Garden of Eden, what is the pattern? Water came up, right? The Gihon. It went through the Arava, down to what they call the Dead Sea, which is not the Dead Sea. And then it went down toward the south, all the way down the Rift Valley, to the end of Africa, all the way to the north, to the top of Turkey, where the Tigris and Euphrates rivers come. And it goes around in the circle. Because again, all the countries were together and the water source came around. So that's the pattern in Eden. And what happens when we're going back to Eden? What do we see in Ezekiel 47? There's a water spring that comes up from under the throne of Yahweh, right? And that water source comes down to the river and it makes the waters clear. What do we see in the book of Revelation? Chapter 22. There's a water source that comes up from the throne of Yahweh. So in biblical times, the pattern is very, very simple. And I'll show you in many, many Psalms also. Yahweh sits above the waters. Yahweh is a deluge to his people. That Yahweh is connected with living water, nothing else. I mean, that is the most basic, fundamental, because water is life. I was telling you, 4 things you need for an ancient city. First thing is water. Without water, don't even think about it. You can't live without water. So now, would it make sense that when you have this large, great, there's only 4 siphon springs in the world, and one of them is right here, where you have gushing of water coming up 3-4 times a day, that you're going to build your temple where there's no water? Makes no sense at all. And that's not what the eyewitnesses said, as we're going to see here. Illustration again. There's the Gihon Spring, where the Gihon Spring would have been right underneath the temple. Huge quantities of water required for temple activities, a spring or fountain within the temple. The Gihon Spring was the only significant water source within a 5-mile radius. Massive water complex at the Gihon Springs under proposed temple site. Here's a letter by Aristeas, who was a historian from 250 BC. So he was around when the temples were still standing. It says the temple faces the east. The whole of the floor slopes down to the appointed place that water may be conveyed to wash away the blood from the sacrifices. For many thousand beasts are sacrificed there on the feast days. 1,260 required sacrifices by the priest, plus individual sacrifices for sin, feast, Thanksgiving, and Passover. Blood and waste must be washed away. To prevent disease, ritual cleanliness must be separate from the water supply. Spring or fountain within the temple. Here again from Aristeas, what he says, there is an inexhaustible supply of water because an abundant natural spring gushes up from within the temple area. Now this is somebody who was there. There's only one spring. How can it be anything else? Here it is. What you're seeing is the hair is exactly the size of every Roman fort. We're told by the eyewitnesses that Fort Antonia is called the Rock because of the large rock underneath it. There's nothing that ever says the Temple Mount is connected with the rock. And the Temple Mount is connected with the city of David. And the other logical thing about it, remember, Yahweh never asked for a temple. David, out of his heart, he said, wow, here it is, I'm building this great house for me, and Yahweh's, staying in a tent. And because his heart was right, what did Yahweh say? Yahweh said, because you wanted to build a house for me, and it was a play on words, I will build a house for you. But it wasn't just a physical house, it was also a spiritual dynasty. So if Yahweh's promising to build a house for him, where would logically he build it? In the city of David, the property that David owns. So here we see, the sources tell us, the eyewitnesses, is there's an abundant natural spring that gushes up from within the temple. This is from the copper scroll that was found in the columns. It says, in the mouth of the fountain of Beth Shem, house of the name, silver and gold, votive vessels and silver coins, the sum total 600 talents. Cassius, from History, 109 AD, the temple resembled a citadel and had its own walls. It contained an inexhaustible spring. There were subterranean excavations in the hill and tanks and cisterns for holding rainwater. So again, another one, the Babylonian Talmud by Rabbi Eliezer B. Jacob. Says, hence go forth the waters which will bubble forth from under the threshold of the sanctuary. Like I say, the most basic thing here. Spring water or fountain within the temple. Let's look at the Psalms. The voice of Yahweh is upon the waters. The Yah of glory thunders. Yahweh is upon many waters. Yahweh sits upon the flood. Psalm 36. You shall make them, the children of men, drink of the river of your pleasures, for with you is the fountain of life. In your light shall we see light. Psalm 87. Yah's fountain is in the holy mountain. Glorious things are spoken of you, city of Yah. All my Yah's springs are in you, in the temple. Jeremiah 2:13. For my people have committed two evils. They have forsaken me, Yahweh, the fountain of living waters, and hewn them out cisterns, broken cisterns, that can hold no water. Interesting enough, a couple of years ago, water started leaking on what they call the Temple Mount, the harem, the hair place. And everybody starts saying, oh, this is Ezekiel 47. It wasn't Ezekiel 47. Those cisterns there, that are more than 2,000 years old, started breaking. And like Yahweh says here, they've forsaken me, the fountain of living waters, and hewn them out cisterns, broken cisterns that can hold no water. Well, how fitting. Exactly what they're doing. They're leaving Yahweh in the temple that's at the Gihon, the real place, and they're looking for a place. And interesting enough, Aristius, he also said not only that there was an inexhaustible spring of water underneath the temple, but he said a third of a mile north of the temple, there were 54 cisterns, exactly how many are on the harem, that had piping that came down to the temple, and they covered the piping with plaster. So like I said, all you have to do is open your eyes, and everything you're reading is showing us that what they're calling the Temple Mount was clearly Fort Antonia, and what they're calling well, they're not calling anything the city of David. One of the problems was this, when you wonder, again, how could they make such a blunder? Do you know they didn't even know what the city of David was until just about 1900? They were thinking Mount Zion is all the way up in the north, or actually in the west. And then all of a sudden, around 1900, a few years before that, when Warren came there, and he came in there, and he found the Hezekiah's Tunnel, and they probably wouldn't have called it Hezekiah's Tunnel unless there was a plaque there, which there was, that clearly said it was Hezekiah's Tunnel. And all of a sudden they said, wow, for the last 2,000 years we've had this wrong. So, only 100 years ago they even knew where the city of David was. But even then they didn't say, you know what, we have the temple in the wrong place. The other thing, remember, when Nehemiah came to Jerusalem, remember in the book of Nehemiah, he's really sad. He's the cupbearer before the king. The king says, why are you sad? He says, oh, my people, the walls are broken down. So the king says, go, you have my blessing. Go to Jerusalem, build the walls. Now, that's not an easy feat. There's not many people. Remember, only 10% of the Jews are coming back there. Sanballat and these other guys are jealous, and they want to kill them. They're trying to kill Nehemiah. All this stuff is happening. But Nehemiah never tells anybody what he's doing at first, because he wants to go and look himself. And what happens? He walks down, and it says he walks past the water gate, down by the stairs of the city of David, to the pool of Siloam. He turns around, he comes to the other side, by the prison gate, which they found. It's right in the beginning of the city of David. There's actually a cistern that's not open anymore. I've been inside of it, where the prophet Jeremiah was. right at the beginning of the city of David. So, as you read it, read yourself tonight, Nehemiah 2, 3, 4. Everything he's going around is the city of David. And then what happens? He decides the walls are broken, right? They're not down to the foundation, but they're broken. And he decides, hey, we're going to rebuild these walls. We have to. So they rebuild the walls, right, in 52 days, which is a miracle. But, you know, if it's what they're saying today, it's impossible. So in 52 days, the walls are rebuilt, and then all of a sudden they start their celebration. Now here's my point why I'm making this. Because if that was the case, right, that would mean that if the Harem, what they're calling the Temple Mount, is the original place of the temple, there are 10,000 foundational stones that have not been knocked down. They're all Herodian stones. Meaningly, they came in the 1st century with Herod. They were not there when Nehemiah was building up. So Nehemiah rebuilt with Solomonic stones the temple, and these stones are Herodian stones. They can't be the same complex. They couldn't be the same complex. They must be too different, because again, Fort Antonia was only built in the 1st century by Herod, but the temple was built all the way going back in the 4th century by Nehemiah and Ezra. Ezekiel 47, afterward he brought me again to the door of the house, and behold, water issued out from under the threshold of the house eastward. And the waters came down from under the right side of Yahweh's house, at the side of the altar. Joel 3:18, all the rivers of Judah shall flow with waters, and a fountain shall come forth of the house of Yahweh. John 4:10 and 11, Yeshua answered and said, if you were aware of the gratuity of Yahweh and who it is who is saying to you, give me to drink, you would request him, and he would give you living waters. Yeshua talked over and over again about living waters. Everything connected with Yahweh and Yeshua is living waters, because living waters is life. Same thing, Revelation 7:17, he shall lead them to living fountains of waters. Like we said, the Gihon Spring was the only significant water source within a 5-mile radius. This is from George Adam Smith. He talks about that. The Gihon Spring is Jerusalem's only supply of fresh water in early antiquity. There's another hill with a well, the Rogel well, which is south of there, but not a major water source. Here's the top view of the Gihon Spring. And like I said, because of the way it is, and the way that the shaft is, it's a siphon spring, where it will shoot, it will gush at certain times of the day, and then close the siphon for it to come out and fill the other areas. That's the area down there, with Warren Shaft, the reservoirs, the steps, and all the other things. Ronnie Reich, one of the archaeologists doing the work down there, his drawing. You see the difference from where the Harem is and where the Gihon is. No water source where the Harem is. Now Fort Antonia. I went over much of this, so I won't do too much, but we'll read a few of these things. This is coming from Josephus' War of the Jews, and talking about when Eleazar, the commander at Masada, when Masada went down, and this is what he was saying, "If Jerusalem is now demolished but to the very foundations, and has nothing but the camp, Fort Antonia, of those that destroyed it, which still dwells upon its ruins. The holy city demolished, the foundations of our holy temple dug up." And that's another thing. When you look at Josephus, he clearly several times said that Jerusalem was like a city you'd never even know there was a city there. He said not one stone was left upon another. Exactly what Yeshua said. Not one stone will be left upon another. And people have actually said to me, Jewish people, well, Yeshua's a fraud. He said one stone won't be left upon another. Look! There's 10,000 Herodian stones there. Like I said, some of them 70 tons. He's false. He lied. He said, no, he didn't lie. You have the wrong place. Here again, Martin's illustration. Fort Antonia, according to Josephus. Now, like we said, 5,000-6,000 men is one legion, and then at least 5,000-6,000 support personnel for each legion. He said it was the size of a city, actually several cities, had 2 bridges connecting to the temple, built upon a massive rock, and dominated the temple to the north. Talks about Roman legion being permanently set there. Talks about the cisterns and the pipes. Here's all the cisterns that are underneath. They're all man-made, no subterranean tunnels, all man-made cisterns. But in the city of David, there are natural subterranean tunnels that are there, where possibly even the Ark of the Covenant could be hidden. Here's one of the cisterns underneath the Temple Mount. Maybe I'll pass this rock around too. The rock under the Dome of the Rock, and you can take a look. Like we said, cisterns are inadequate for purity. We read this before. Like we said, it was the size of several cities. This is down at Masada. You can see the size of a Roman fort, again, from Masada, the same size as you see what they're calling the Temple Mount, that is Fort Antonia, same exact size. This is down in the desert. There's a schematic of a basic Roman fort. I sent you a picture of one. Again, same exact size as the harem. There's a picture he has of that. Here Josephus says the Tower of Antonia was built upon a rock 50 cubits high, 75 feet, on all its sides precipitous. He said the southeast corner had the wall actually from the base of the Kidron came to 450 feet. You can see the elevation. Antonio dominated the temple, as we see in this picture. According to Josephus, Fort Antonia formed on the north the only obstruction to the view of the temple. And interesting enough, in 66 the Great Revolt started. And what happened, the Jews actually overtook Fort Antonia, and they took it. They threw the Romans out, they controlled it all the way to 69, when Titus came in and sacked the temple. Now the interesting part is, when Titus came, before he sacked the temple, he overtook Fort Antonia again and got the Jews out. Josephus talks about he had to destroy the whole northern wall in order to overtake the fort again. When you go there today, the only wall of the harem that is completely gone, no ancient stones, is the northern wall. The very wall that Josephus told us was completely destroyed when they came back in and overtook it. Like he says, the temple itself was 600 stadia square, where what they're calling the Temple Mount is double that size. So it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit the arena anyway. The double colonnade, 600 feet each one. And there you see it. So we see the temple was 600 stadia square, where Fort Antonia was 1,200. Look, double colonnades. Here's a look from the top, exactly what we're seeing. That's where they put Fort Antonia, in that little corner, which is impossible. Some quotes on it. You can see, like I said, the Dome of the Rock there, you see how it's octagonal, 8 sides, compared to the Elastomas. The Elastomas was the first one built. It was built in 619 by Omar, the Caliph after Muhammad. And this is the holy one. The other one over there, like I said, that was a church. It was a church that they destroyed and then they rebuilt the mosque on it. And we said, why did they build the church? Because supposedly they said that's where Yeshua stood on that rock to give his defense in the Praetorium. Also, there was over there around that rock before that, there was a temple to Apollos, the god Apollos, during the Greek time period. interesting enough, what Omer said was the reason why he put the mosque there, because in every mosque they have that, what do they call it, Qibli or whatever, where they pray toward Mecca. He said that he wanted to put it there because he asked the Jews who were living at that time where the temple was, and he wanted to put it where they had to pray through Solomon's temple, looking toward Mecca. And that's the reason they put it there, because the temple would have been directly south of there. Here, like we said, Yeshua's statement. There shall not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. Josephus confirms this. Caesar ordered the whole city and the temple to be razed to the ground. The wall encompassing the city was so completely leveled to the ground as to leave further visitors to the spot no ground for believing that it had ever been inhabited. Nothing left of Jerusalem. If Jerusalem is now demolished to the very foundations, it has nothing but the camp of those that destroyed it, which still rest in its ruins. That holy city demolished, the foundation of our holy temple dug up. The harem still has 5,000, it's actually 10,000 stones, one upon another from the original Herodian construction. It says here it was never be rebuilt. Conclusions. What does it matter? Well, he goes into this business with Camp David. Too long of a day to look at Arafat. Jewish temples were above the Gihon Spring. That's evident. Sources from 250 BC to 1577 AD attest to the Jewish temples being above the Gihon. Yeshua's statement of no stone upon another. Here he shows the Wailing Wall, the Dome of the Rock. Like I said, if you saw the church that up to date, that would have been on top of Mount Gerizim, from exactly the time that this was built, and exactly the same structure. There's a lot of them that were churches like that. Like I said, the Persians and the Arabs destroyed them all. Two inscriptions that are in the Dome of the Rock. One was to the Muslims in general, the outer inscription. The other was exclusively for Christians. Again, because of what was built there. That's inside, it's the Dome of the Rock. Like I said, the bird in Mecca would come straight through the temple. Starting to like this thing. Fort Antonia, Temple Mount, Gihon Spring. There's his illustration. I got a lot more I can go over. I see that everybody looks kind of tired, so I'm not going to go too much more, because like I said, as we go to these places, what I want to do is I just want to put these things in your mind, so that when we go there on Wednesday, you'll be able to see it and understand it more. But to me, the most important thing is this. The Olivet prophecy, Matthew 24, Mark 13, and Luke 21. And in each one tells the same story, but a little bit differently. But Mark 13 says something that's very interesting. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it ought not to be, then let those in Judea flee to the mountains. So in my mind, when I read that scripture, it's pretty clear that Yahweh has purposely hid the true Temple Mount so it wouldn't be defiled. That where Yahweh's holy of holies, remember, when Adam and Eve sinned and they were cast out of the garden, what did he do? He had to put cherubs to guard it. Because something that is sanctified to Yahweh, Yahweh will allow Satan to be a counterfeiter, but he won't allow Satan to rob something that's set apart to him. So that's where maybe I differ somewhat from David Seelap. I don't believe that this is going to be accepted. But I believe it is a major blessing to Yahweh's people in the end time to know it. Because when it happens, and they're building maybe something on Fort Antonia, and the whole world is going crazy about it, maybe even miracles are happening, The true people of Yahweh will know this is only another sign. We're getting closer to the end. You know, when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it ought not to be. I think I will have mercy on you. And tonight, and like I said, we'll have a lot of time when we're over there, and I can go into a lot of this. I'll bring the book, I'll read some more. But like I said, when you look at it overall, it's very evident. It's evident from the historical evidence. It's evident from looking at the evidence we're seeing. These steps over here in the middle, where we're going to be, in the middle of the Opal Court, would have been where Paul would have been, up on those steps when the Romans came and took him. And they took him into the fort, where they came and attacked him. And there's a lot of really neat stuff over there. In the last maybe 5 years, they've been doing extensive digging at the Southern Wall Complex. And we haven't been there in a long time. And that's why I want to bring you there. I want to show it to you. And it's a really neat place. We'll probably be several hours just in that complex there. And I think when you see it, it'll even make more sense. So if there's any questions, I'll take a few questions, and then we'll end for tonight. Too tired to raise your hand? Yes, Peter.
Don, why the colonnade between San Antonio and the temple?
Yes, good question. Why are the colonnades between Fort Antonio and the temple? Remember, if you were a Roman soldier during the 1st century and you got sent to Jerusalem, you were wondering, what did I do wrong? Jerusalem was the last. It's almost like a soldier in America being sent to Iraq. You know, you don't want to go there. There's only misery, there's trouble, there's nothing good that's going to come out of it. So, a matter of fact, the Romans used to hold the vesture of the high priest. They would hold it captive, and if the Jews were causing trouble and uprising, they would not give them the vesture of the high priest on Yom Kippur. So they did that to make sure that there was no trouble. So what that was used for is that if there was any rioting or any chaos going on, that they had access to get into the Temple Mount. That was the reason why they had those 2 colonnades there.
Now, what I've done documented what I've watched.
Yes.
They say the reason why there was no stone left unturned. They believe that where they put it to fire, all the gold melted and goes between the stones. And everybody was trying to get to the gold. And that's why they moved.
That's why there was no.
Yeah, stones left.
Yes.
So they was moving all the stones away to get to the gold apparently.
Well, could have been, because again, many of the stuff was gold. We know under high heat, gold would melt, and turning it over. Much of those stones, a lot of them were used to build the Alaska Mosque and other things. And a matter of fact, there was a stone, it's not the Dome of the Rock that's 58 by 51 feet, when the room is only 30 by 30, but there was a slab of a stone that was underneath the Holy of Holies, underneath the Ark of the Covenant. And what is said is that when they built the Alaska Mosque, they took that slab, and it's in the Alaska Mosque today. If it's true enough. Yes?
What was the distance for that? For the Haram for Antonio, what was the distance?
What is the size of it? 1,200 feet by, I don't know if it's 600 or 604. See, because of the rock, it's not an exact rectangle. But another thing that's interesting is that Josephus says about the Temple Mount being 600 feet square, and you'll see this in the movie we're going to watch Wednesday. At the city of David, from this end to this end is exactly 600 feet. Exactly. So it's like every little even detail fits to it, you know, when you look at it. Any other questions? Yes, Denise.
It looks like they went to a lot of trouble building the Roman fort, and it looks a lot bigger than the temple area. Why did they bother? Why did they just destroy that worship for the Jews, and instead of keeping it going and just guarding them like this? Why'd they waste their time? Why didn't they just cut them off right away?
Well, because again, remember, the Romans were brutal when you were on the wrong side of law, but the Romans actually were the first people in the world that actually had the rule of law. So they had a world empire where there was a rule of law. And that's why Paul, when they were trying to kill him, what did he say? I appealed to Caesar, because he knew as a Roman citizen he had rights. I say that with America. I know America is going down real quick. But in America, there's still a rule of law. At least there's been to now. And I say, in America, it's very complicated. You have to keep jumping through hoops until you get to the end result you want. But if you jump through enough hoops, you're going to get to that end result. In Israel, circular pattern. So you just keep going around in a circle over and over and over again. You never get anywhere, unless you know the right person. So there's a difference when you have a rule of law. And over there, that's what it was. There was a rule of law. So they didn't want to just kill everybody. As a matter of fact, with Masada, they pleaded with them. And that's why what the Romans would do is, when they would come, why did it take from 68 AD to 70 to destroy the temple? They could have destroyed them within months. Number one, they didn't want their soldiers to die. They were logical, because people wouldn't want to be soldiers. Soldiers were paid good, though. The second thing was that they didn't want to kill people that they didn't have to. So what did they do? They put a siege around the city. They'd starve the people out and hope that they would just surrender. And then if they didn't surrender, they'd build a siege mound, they'd come in, and then they'd wipe everybody else they have to. But when they went into Masada, the general, he was absolutely appalled seeing that everybody committed suicide. That was just not an option. So there was some kind of value to life, and there was a rule of law in the Roman Empire. So that's why they didn't just come in and kill everybody. But at the same rate, they knew the problems that were there. And they tried to appease the Jews to a point. Now when Herod, remember, Herod was half Jewish. He converted to Judaism. And the reason why he converted was because of his father, Herod, that came in and had all the money and the spices and all that stuff. And Herod thought, well, if he appeases to the Jews, that's going to make him in good favor with them. But they couldn't stand him because he wasn't a Jew and he really didn't convert. So he realized quick enough that he's better to appease to the Romans who have the power than appease to the Jews. And then he became the Jews' worst nightmare. Because that's where, a matter of fact, when Herod was on his deathbed, and they say he had syphilis, he knew he was going to die, what he did was, he went out and he said, find the 300 most righteous Jews that are here and kill them, so that when I'm dead, the Jews will be mourning. That's the kind of person he was. He was an evil, evil dictator. I mean, absolutely evil. Yes, Dolly?
The one, an evil dictator too, why does he have control over the temple now?
Just the way they set it up, with, again, mistake that the Jews made. But if you look at al-Husseini, the walk that was there when Israel became a nation, he clearly backed Hitler, was part of supporting Hitler. So, it's the old thing. It's just like in 1967, when the 6 Jews came onto the Temple Mount and overtook it. Gershom Solomon was one of them. Some of you have met him, a friend of mine. Good guy. And they put the Israeli flag on the Temple Mount. Sorry about that. They put the Israeli flag on the Temple Mount, and then after 5 minutes they said, take it down. They said, take it down. We just won the war. Why are we taking it down? He said, because we're not going to start World War III. And the problem is that the Jews have been intimidated ever since they've been a nation, and if they would have dealt with some of these things 50 years ago, they wouldn't have half the problems they have today. But even today, they have the power, they can do things, and they're always intimidated. What will America think? What will the world community think? So the WAP is just something also. Now, with this deal that they're trying to make, a final agreement, what the deal is that the Palestinians would have control of the Temple Mount. I just turned it off. That the Palestinians would have control of the Temple Mount, and the Jews would have control underneath the Temple Mount.
Bumping style.
Now, Carter didn't, or no, Clinton did that, didn't he? He gave them underneath and the Jews...
Well, that's what they're saying. That way, the Jews are thinking, well, they're never going to get it back anyway, but they want to make sure the antiquities aren't destroyed. So that solves it for both. But on the other end, something's going to happen here. Yahweh didn't bring this back. He didn't build to this climax, to have a sleeper ending. It just ain't going to happen that way. So we know, more than likely, we can tell from Scripture, that they'll build some kind of temple. As a matter of fact, if you look at the Oslo Agreement, what they were going to build is, they were going to build like a triune complex that would be a synagogue for the Jews or some sort of temple, a mosque for the Muslims, and a church all connected into one. And the Pope would be the overseer. And it never happened. They came really close. As a matter of fact, the Pope was adamant when Arafat didn't go through the deal, and that's why they said, man, we got to get him out. Because they thought Arafat would be the one to bring them to this, and then Arafat turned them on the end. And that's why I say the last 10 years now, they've been trying to get it back to Oslo. It hasn't worked, and now they realize it ain't going to come through peace, it's got to come through war. And that's what started the Arab Spring and changing all the dynamics of what's happening here in the Middle East. Any other questions on the Temple Mount?
They say God has no son.
Yes, on the top of the mosque, it says Allah has no sons. In Arabic. Well, of course he doesn't. Yahweh doesn't have any Arabic sons. Any other questions before we end up? Alrighty, well, we'll be talking more, so if you have more questions, we can go over them tomorrow and the next day. But have a good night. Tomorrow morning, we'll see everybody for breakfast.